Greetings, comrades, and welcome back to another episode of the Comrade Cast. And since we've last recorded, it's been quite a busy time politically, and I am almost overwhelmed. It gets to the point where there are so many crazy things happening, it's really hard to keep up with. So I decided that today I wanted to take a broader look at things, and we're going to zoom out, and we're going to look at a lot of what's happening in the United States and how this is drastically destabilizing the current world order. But personally, I think it's going downhill pretty quick, it seems. So while there has been a lot of stuff that has happened politically, today, again, I want to focus more on the broad picture. So things like what's happening specifically with Elon Musk and his tampering within the US government, not really going to be covered in this episode. And one of the reasons why is because as extremely frustrating as what is happening, as someone who is outside of the country, who is outside of the United States, I feel like I can't do anything. I don't want an episode to be just me screaming into the ether or something like that. So while I have a lot of contention with what is happening there, there's not a lot I could do about it on a micro level. That being said, I am planning something in regards to that on a more macro level. But today, I want to go back to good old geopolitical strategy and how Donald Trump's chaotic moves are causing countries across the world to re-examine their strategic calculus. So let's jump to the first point of consideration, how things are shaping up between my country and the United States, which is, of course, Canada. And actually, let me zoom out here. Let's include Mexico, too, because they are certainly affected by Donald Trump's saber rattling on tariffs. And one of the most frustrating things, and I knew this was going to happen going into the Donald Trump presidency, is just keeping up with what he says he's going to do and what actually ends up happening, right? Because Donald Trump was coming out and saying, there's no way you can ever avoid this. It's coming 100%. The dawn of the tariff day happens, and they figure it all out and everything ends up being okay. And then, of course, now there are resurfacing talks on tariffs on aluminum and other goods. And it just feels like there's absolutely no overarching strategy to what is happening at all. And on a real fundamental level, what all of this chaos, all of this bad faith negotiation with the United States is hurting one of the core pillars of American power and is fundamentally weakening their country. So a lot of people, when Donald Trump came into office, definitely expected a trade war, but they expected much of Donald Trump's ire to be directed towards China and maybe markets close to China, because one of the stated goals of this tariff strategy was to make it harder for China to circumnavigate tariffs by a Chinese company setting up factories in, say, Vietnam or the Philippines or Indonesia or wherever else. They could effectively bypass U.S. tariffs. So you could have it made in Vietnam, all of a sudden not subject to the same tariffs. This is something the Trump administration has wanted to avoid, and it's very sensible, that part, right? I can actually agree with, I can understand the logical reality of where this policy choice is coming from. So when it came to if Donald Trump was going to actually have sensible policy when he took office, in our wildest fantasies, a lot of these trade barriers would probably be focused more towards many of these Asian markets. That's something you would expect. What you wouldn't expect is for him to come right out the door and basically blow up a century of goodwill between Mexico and the United States and Canada and the United States for no discernible reason. So going back to that kind of fundamental pillar of U.S. policy, of U.S. power, one of the things that has made the U.S. so powerful and prosperous is setting itself up as the hub of international business. These are the guys you want to do business with because you can count on their contracts to be stable, profitable, and reliable. And that attitude of the United States doing business pretty freely internationally throughout the world has enriched the United States far beyond our imagination. And one of the things that the United States has used to enhance and maintain its power is its business prowess, is its markets, is its status as the de facto negotiator of business dealings around the world. But now that Donald Trump is back in office and he has come out of the gates extremely hot, the world is asking, is the United States actually such a stable business partner? Do we really want to be doing business with them anyway? And there's definitely an American arrogance that you will see going around. It's they need us, they need our markets, they need our customer base, right? And, there's no question that the United States is an extremely powerful consumer economy, but this isn't the 1960s, this isn't in the 70s, this isn't the 80s. The United States is a shadow of its former self in terms of the power that it has economically on the global stage. There are many other competing markets out there, which may not be as large as the United States, but comparatively, there's China, there's the EU, there's India, even countries like Indonesia and Brazil, South Africa. All of these countries are becoming larger, more emerging markets. And in relation to the United States, they're no longer as powerful as an economic force. And this whole underpinning of this network of interconnected and beneficial relationships for the United States economy is now collapsing at a pace that I never thought imaginable. And if things continue their precipitous collapse, there's going to be a massive power gap internationally that countries like China are happy to fill, countries like Russia are happy to fill, and of course, some of those smaller aforementioned countries, might want to take a larger part of the pie as well. So regardless, all of this talk of tariffs, all of this talk of Canada becoming the 51st state has ignited a feeling of Canadian patriotism that I've never seen personally. I've never seen Canadians this fired up and this proud of their country, so happy to be waving that maple leaf. And we're going to cover how this hostile trajectory from Donald Trump, from the United States, is basically killing the Canadian Conservative Party. If you guys recall, we looked at this map fairly recently. This is the 338, one of Canada's most predominant polling aggregate sites. This is their projection for the upcoming Canadian national election, which is due to happen at some point this year. Last time we checked, the Conservatives were absolutely dominating in the tallies. And as of our last check-in, last time we checked in was just when Justin Trudeau had stepped down and the Conservatives were riding crazy high polling averages. Now, in the span of a couple weeks, things are changing dramatically. Without Justin Trudeau to be a political threat for the Conservatives, they're having much more difficulty in terms of defining their actual campaign, in terms of defining their actual message, because so much of Pierre Poilievre's campaign hinged on, hey, I'm the guy that's not Trudeau. Now that Trudeau's out of the picture, he's actually got to define himself and what his party stands for. Instead of a cakewalk, now we're looking into an actual race. One of the major things you'll recall is that last time we looked at this map, the Bloc Québécois was set to become the official opposition. And now the Liberals are back into triple digits, and it is quite a political reversal. And what is happening here? Why are we seeing these numbers shift so quickly and so drastically in such a short period of time? The main answer is Donald Trump's antagonism towards Canada. And while the Liberals still have quite a hurdle to overcome, they're not winning right now. They've gained a lot of ground, and their reputation has taken a serious beating. It's going to take a lot for them to end up winning, but you never say never in politics. And right now, the Conservatives are definitely on the back foot and trying to figure out where are they going to pivot from here. So one of the issues for our beloved Pierre Poilievre is that he is basically seen as Trump's lackey. He's seen basically that he's going to go to Trump. He's just going to bend the knee. He's going to give him whatever he wants, and that Canada's interests won't be adequately represented in a negotiation between him and Donald Trump. At least this is the feeling that a lot of Canadians are getting right now. And Pierre Poilievre has not helped this himself in any way, shape, or form, because when the whole tariff saber rattling thing was happening, he basically stayed silent the entire time. And not only that, he looked like a little bitch in comparison to another conservative politician who has actually taken the politically intelligent track with what's happening in regards to what's happening in the United States. So if you don't know who this guy is, I envy you. This is Doug Ford. He is the Conservative Premier of Ontario. And I have my huge disagreements with the man, but right now, in comparison to Pierre Poilievre, he looks like a goddamn lion. He looks like a goddamn titan, because as soon as Donald Trump comes out with a lot of his ultimatums on tariffs and whatnot, Doug Ford comes forward and says, we're Canada first, Canada's number one. He had this hat that he came out with, Canada is not for sale, alluding to the whole Donald Trump hat. He also happens to be in the middle of a campaign himself, and he's cleaning up because he understands that Canadians are proud of their country, they're proud of where they come from, and they are not enthusiastic at all about joining the United States. Virtually every Canadian I know wants someone who seems like they are strong, wants someone who's going to stand up to Donald Trump. Doug Ford has been able to embody that from a conservative perspective, whereas someone like Pierre Poilievre has not at all, and he is suffering because of it. So let's move on to the last piece about this puzzle, which has changed the Liberal fortunes. Since Justin Trudeau has announced that he's going to step down, the Liberals have been undergoing a leadership contest, which this man is almost certain to win. This is Mark Carney. He is the former governor of the Bank of Canada and former governor of the Bank of England. He is seen as being a very strong steward of the economy because not only does he have all this experience, during the 2008 recession, he was seen as the guy who led Canada through the recession and did a really good job and blah, 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 blah. He's a well-known face and he's got credibility as someone who's competent. Personally, I will not be voting for the man. I have a very strict policy of no voting for bankers. So because he's a banker, he's out as far as I'm concerned. But this guy has absolutely breathed a ton of life into the Liberal Party, not only by being seen as someone who has a competent track record, but because he has this economic background, he is seen as someone who could very adeptly negotiate with Trump in regards to whatever hostile action he's going to take tomorrow. Who knows, right? So the point here being is that Donald Trump has completely cracked open the Canadian political system, and it has left a vacuum for someone who looks like he is going to be his ultimate antagonist to fill. The thing is, if he had just saved this for 6 months down the road, almost certainly Pierre Poilievre would win the election, and then he could have someone who's an ideological ally in Canada, someone who has a lot more positive feelings towards Trump than our previous prime minister. But because of this antagonistic attitude, it's very likely that could end up not happening, and he ends up with a government which is much more hostile to the United States and much less willing to negotiate. And ultimately, this hurts everybody. All of this chaos, all this uncertainty does a ton of damage to everybody involved. And you guys got to think, like, our supply chains are so fragile already. The second you add in like the tiniest disruptions, prices are going to fluctuate wildly, and most likely they're going to go through the roof. But this whole obliterating of goodwill between a lot of the United States' most powerful neighbors certainly undermines it, because at the end of the day, in order for the United States to outcompete its geopolitical rival, it's going to need access to Canada's cheap resources and Mexico's cheap labor. Without those, the United States will certainly be outcompeted and crushed by China in short order. The thing is that the United States, yes, it can't always take care of itself. It's got enough resources and money to take care of itself, but it's no longer going to be the world's superpower at this rate. It's no longer going to be the world's most important country. It's going to be a regional power. And all of this movement is in the benefit of one country, and that is, of course, the People's Republic of China. I never thought I would be saying this, but I feel like their stock for winning the game of civilization is riding very high right now. They still have a myriad of issues that they need to solve. They need to solve their demographic crisis. They need to solve their real estate crisis. They need to solve their dependence on foreign imports and exports to fuel their economy. But these are all things that they are working on currently. And if there's one thing that the recent release of DeepSeek has told me is that the Chinese are full of surprises. And if you guys don't know, DeepSeek is effectively an AI model which is able to outcompete the Western AI models like ChatGPT in terms of energy consumed and money invested to build it. And the release of that AI model just wiped out $1 trillion worth of wealth from American companies. So it's very clear that China is able to overcome obstacles if given enough time and resources. And one obstacle that I see them overcoming currently is their need for ridiculous amounts of oil. It's one of their largest Achilles heel, that if they were ever to lose access to oil, the whole country would shut down very quickly. But with their incredible subsidies in electric vehicles, they are moving very quickly to a point where oil might not be as a necessary resource as it used to be. They have all the materials and minerals they need to manufacture electric batteries on a massive scale, far more than any other country, and they're clearly using this to their advantage. And that's the one thing I really don't understand about this current United States foreign policy. They are causing a whole bunch of chaos and uncertainty, which is weakening them and strengthening their enemies. I feel like there's nobody who's looking at this current trade war and hostility brewing between Canada and Mexico and the EU and the United States and a whole bunch of other countries that were traditionally considered to be allies. I don't think there's anybody happier than the Chinese Communist Party. They must be jumping up and down and high-fiving themselves with glee right now. But here's the thing with China. I don't think they have the appetite or want to become the global hegemon in the same way that the United States has. I think they just really want to dominate their own playground in their own backyard. I think they want to be the undisputed masters of everything that happens in East Asia. They want to have the final say. They want to be able to dictate the policies of the various countries around them, but they don't want to guard the global shipping lanes. They don't want to deploy forces on international peacekeeping missions and stuff like that. Either way, there are a ton of people right now who used to think that the United States was the way to go for their trading relationships and are deciding maybe we should look somewhere else. And let's talk now about another country which is jumping up and down for joy with what's happening, and that is, of course, Russia. We're already seeing some of the details emerge on the Ukraine peace deal, proposed peace deal, which Ukraine apparently isn't really a part of. They're being sidelined in their own peace negotiations. Of course, nothing is set in stone, but one of the big sticking points that has come out of the talks between the United States and Russia has been effectively that Ukraine will not be getting all of its territory back. Ukraine will not be restored to the previous 2014 borders. Ukraine's not going to get Crimea back. Ukraine's not going to get Donbass back. In fact, Ukraine might not get any of the occupied territory back. And as we've talked about before, some of that has already been given away by Zelensky. He's already come out and said, we're not going to get Crimea back, for instance. That's off the table. But a lot of these other things, which are apparently off the table for Ukraine, Zelensky has not agreed to, and he has not consented to. Obviously, that given, I see a serious conflict of interest brewing here. Of course, if the United States and Russia come to some sort of peace deal and they put it on the table and Ukraine refuses, then all of a sudden Russia can come out and say, now they're the aggressors. They're refusing to come to the table. They're refusing to accept a peace deal, so on and so forth. So they can use that as political leverage. I'm getting increasingly worried that Ukraine is going to get strong-armed to a really shitty deal here. At least it looks like the Ukrainian state will continue to exist, but at the same time, it's going to be greatly neutered and probably have to give away a ton of its territory to Russia. And I've been thinking about this, looking at the map, trying to figure out if the United States or if Donald Trump specifically has any kind of long-term political goal or geopolitical or strategic goal. And the only thing I can think of is if there's some sort of 5D chess move that can be pulled out of his ass. The only thing I could think of is that by bringing Russia closer to the United States and renormalizing relationship with the United States, they're hoping to undercut the Russo-Chinese relationship, effectively, if the United States can break apart Russia and China, that would do a huge amount of damage to China. China is using a lot of Russian materials and resources and basically exploiting them as a big mineral dump. If the United States is able to take that away from China, it would be a pretty sizable blow to them. The only issue being is that if the United States was going to do that, they'd effectively have to blow up centuries of diplomatic relationships in Western Europe. There's no telling what something like that could do. You could force Western Europe to basically ally with China instead of Russia. And now all of a sudden, China is the backing of powerful economies like France, like Germany, potentially the UK, depending on what happens in that country. Because there's no way that the United States can build a strong relationship with Russia without basically giving Russia the keys to the kingdom over Eastern Europe again. Basically saying, you guys, this is your sphere of influence. This is your territory. You guys can do whatever you wanted to back like it was the Soviet days. And away you go. In return, you stop hanging out with China. Obviously, that's going to be a real bum deal for a lot of people in Europe, and they wouldn't exactly be enthusiastic about it. What's funny, I think I'll end off the episode on this note, looking at grand strategy, because I was reading some of Alexander Dugin's work, and if you're not familiar with him, he's basically like the thought leader in terms of where Russia is going in a geopolitical direction post-Soviet Union. And his kind of overarching grand strategy view is called Eurasianism. And in Eurasianism, the world is broken up into these kind of civilizational spheres, and each civilization works together or competes with each other depending on the circumstances. They all grow and exist in this multipolar world. So let's do a little bit of drawing here. So the first civilization is basically the Eurasian civilization, which is like Russia, parts of Eastern Europe, Central Asia, maybe Mongolia, and all the way out to here. And the second one is the Western civilization, which is basically all of the Atlantic. He like calls it like the Atlantic civilization, right? Western Europe, the United States, the typical Western order. And then the last one is like the Asian sphere run by China and then condensed into that whole area. You have these different spheres in the world, and it's basically the job of the Eurasian sphere to combat the influence that the West has, because the West is the one civilization that can't be happy with its own area. It has to expand into other areas. And it's the Eurasian civilization's job to stop them from doing that effectively. And one of the interesting things about this, these poles of civilization that he conjures up, is that every civilization is contained, or he believes it would be best for all these civilizations to be contained in these kind of vertical silos, where each civilization in the north kind of trades and exploits almost like the civilizations in the south. So the United States would exploit South America, Europe, Africa, and Russia would exploit the Middle East and parts of Central Asia and Persia and that kind of stuff. And China would then exploit Vietnam, Indonesia, maybe India and that kind of stuff. And they'd all exploit each other in this equilibrium. And if they could all just get in their silos, everybody could get along and everyone would be happy. This whole trade war with Donald Trump brought this whole idea back to me, because he's basically like blowing it up. He's like taking the idea of the American silo, the American, sphere, and blowing up trade relations for really no discernible reason. Anyway, so that's at its core a lot of what's driving Russian geopolitical thought right now, is this idea that they are a third pillar in the world. They're a third entity, a distinct civilization, and part of their job is to counteract Western civilization's power. And right now, the United States is doing a great job of that. My point here being is that this is why the Russians are ecstatic right now. Not only is United States disrupting a lot of its long-held alliances and relationships, it's also potentially going to give them a good deal in Ukraine, and maybe they think good deals in other places if they can get a strong enough relationship with the United States. Yeah, basically, long story short, my whole thesis here got muddled, but my point here being is that it feels like the multipolar world is coming, and it's coming quick. The United States is giving up its mantle as the world protector. It's very weird. There's almost this strange dichotomy going on in the United States right now, particularly with Trump supporters, that they still want the United States to be number one in the world and the top dog on the world stage, but they don't want the United States to do all of the work and spend all of the money, time, material, and resources to make that actually happen and maintain the structures that make that actually happen. That's the kind of dichotomy. It's, you guys want the United States to be this isolationist island, completely self-sufficient, taking care of itself and no one else? Or do you still want the United States to be the number one top dog, the only country that matters, the one that everybody comes to, and blah, 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 blah? You can't have it both ways, really. But my gut is telling me that they move more towards the former. They're more towards the isolationist stance. They don't really care what happens in the rest of the world. They don't really care about what the rest of the world thinks about the United States. If the position of the United States is damaged internationally, they don't really care, just so long as their own needs are taken care of. I think, at least I hope, that many of the kind of soft Trump supporters are going to quickly wake up and realize that if we do want to move towards a more isolationist type of country, there is going to be a lot of disruption. There is going to be a lot of pain. And at the end of the day, is the reward, quote unquote, really going to be worth it? Absolutely not. And let me end on this note. There's something I've been thinking about a lot in regards to the new Trump era, where you're seeing some people waking up to the notion that, hey, this isn't what I signed up for. This isn't what I wanted at all. I didn't sign up for all this chaos. I didn't sign up for all of this craziness. I hoped that Donald Trump would bring a stable, steady hand. And that is not at all what this initial opening salvo of the administration has looked like. I've been thinking, like, on the left, how should we interact with these people that come to grips with what is happening, start to turn against Donald Trump? And my prediction is that there's going to be more and more of them as he does crazier and crazier things. My personal belief is that we need to welcome these people with open arms. We need to not hold a grudge. We need to welcome, like I said, the soft Trump supporters, right? The ones at the edges that weren't really convinced about Donald Trump, but they believed his rhetoric that he was going to bring down prices, that he was going to make things better for average people, but he hasn't done that. We need to welcome those people as much as we can and try as best we can. I know it's hard, right? Because this is something I've been thinking about and struggling with, but I think it's definitely necessary to put a lot of those feelings of anger and resentment under the bridge and try and do what we can to salvage a better future. And the thing is that the hardcore Trump supporters, they are not going to question. They're not going to be the ones who are questioning. They're not going to be on the fringes thinking about, oh, is what he's doing right or wrong? We can basically effectively ignore those people because there's really no point in talking to them. There's really no point in trying to convince them. It's over. It's over for those people. They're gone. But it wasn't those people that got Donald Trump elected. It was the softer support on the outside. And already that support is peeling away. It's going to continue to peel away. And it's important to make those people feel as at home outside the Donald Trump camp as possible. And with that, and on that note, I want to thank you guys for watching. This has been the Comrade, signing off for now. Until next time, you guys take care.